All right, welcome everybody to episode 28 of SFF Addicts, where we will be discussing memorable characters in SFF. And personally, I'm 100% a character-driven reader and storyteller, and if I can't find characters that I connect with, regardless of whether they're morally good, gray, bad, whatever, then a story tends to lose me, which is why I'm very excited to have these three good friends with me to discuss the topic, who'll all be sharing their thoughts on what makes some characters so memorable, whether it be their personality or their name. And first up is Sara Carothers, making her fourth appearance on SFF Addicts. She's the co-host of Fiction Fans podcast and a lover of pugs. So welcome back, Sara. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you as always. And also joining us is Lilly Ellison, making her third appearance on the show. She's the other co-host of Fiction Fans podcast and a lover of cats. So glad to have you back on the podcast, Lilly.
Well, you knew what you were getting into.
Always. And finally, the hottest quadruplet in the land, Mr. Biceps himself, Connor M. Caplan. He's the author of The Sword in the Street, an SPFBO 7 semi-finalist, and he's currently hard at work on his next book. And good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. Mr. Biceps is actually my erotica pseudonym.
Ooh. Is that like your Chuck Tingle?
Yeah. It's I have an erotica pseudonym for like where it's pounded in the butt by my extreme biceps or some shit.
Wow, we're getting into this early. Dan Fitzgerald and Kristen Matar are going to be loving this. So to start off the discussion of memorable characters in SFF, I thought it would be good to get all of your opinions on, what is important to you about fictional characters when you're reading a book. So Lilly, I'll start with you.
Adrian, I had this whole thing set up, how I was going to sum up all of my entries like a thesis statement at the end, but apparently you're lucky I came up with it early.
We're not very academic on this podcast, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. I noticed that all of my characters, something they had in common was that I had actually very mixed feelings about all of them. None of them were characters that I actually love wholeheartedly. They're all characters that I maybe didn't necessarily love the work or had maybe very strong opinions about some element of it, or the characters themselves. Or maybe they were part of an ongoing meta discussion about the work as a whole. And yeah, I don't think any of them are my favorite character out of the work that I'm choosing. But you said memorable, and that's different.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like when it comes to when you're reading a book, what is important to you about a character, regardless of, your thesis and your meta-analysis of these people who are not actually your favorites?
Who do I end up talking about afterwards? I feel like is part of that question, right? Who do I argue about and talk about constantly? Not my favorite character.
It's like, you can just get out of here. Go, shoot.
Yeah, I love you. Goodbye.
Exactly. And Sara, what about you?
So I think in contrast with Lilly, as usual, most of the time my favorite, or not my favorite, but the most memorable characters for me are my favorites. It's a character that I relate to in one way or another. I mean, yes, there are the memorable characters that are memorable because I absolutely loathe them and can't stand them. That does happen. But the ones that I'm talking about on the podcast are all characters that I do actually quite enjoy.
Yeah, I feel pretty similar way, but Connor, what's your take?
A lot of the people on my list are generally people who, like, I enjoy those characters. I don't know if they're usually my favorites, but they're like the kind of people who is just sort of like, I want to pick your brain. It's someone who it's like a character I would want to sit down and just like ask questions at until like 3 a.m. just to see what they would say about things.
It's like, you're kind of fucked up, so I want to know more.
Yeah.
What's going on in that head of yours?
Yeah, you're kind of a piece of shit. What opinions do you have?
Yeah, I mean, for me too, it's like going through, all these books that I've read and the characters that really stuck out to me. It's like a lot of the time they're pretty shitty people, or just at least like very conflicted in terms of their actions and like their moral conundrums and stuff like that, which I guess is what makes a good story in the end, is like internal conflict mixing together with external conflict, and it's like that internal conflict is the kind of thing that really makes me click with POV characters, because like there's occasional side characters where I'm like, damn, you're good, like that the author somehow managed to paint like this beautiful portrait in very sparse words, but just because of the POV nature of those types of characters, it's like I'm inside their heads so much, and especially over the course of a series where I'm just like, oh, I'm just vibing with you hard, you know? And those are the kinds of people that linger with me for a long time. Not necessarily like all of you have said, is like, you're not clearly my favorite character in existence, but it's like you're so memorable because it's like you sucked me into your messed up world and all the shit that was going on. And, you know, I find that there's this like new trend. I mean, I guess it's not that new, but it's like maybe starting in the like early 90s up until now, where there's like a lot more character driven stories. But what do you all think about this sort of transcendence of, you know, character driven stories over what was more, I would call like idea or plot driven stories that were so integral in terms of like 50s, 60s, 70s, all that older crap that, you know, people call the golden age, but I feel like we're living in the golden age now.
I mean, personally, I like a balance. Like, I find that the characters in these character-driven stories, like, they do stay with me more, but sometimes you just want something that's like plot and you zip along and you don't remember anything about the characters afterwards, and that's fine.
Sarah just needs a palate cleanser. Just like
sometimes I do. Like, sometimes I just want those popcorn books.
Yeah.
True. Lily, Connor, what about you?
I think it's interesting that you called out the recent past, because I feel like they kind of go in and out of popularity over time, right? If you go a little farther back, well, maybe I'm thinking a little farther than that. You get stories that are just characters telling their story and then they move on. And it's actually not a very good plot at all.
True.
But these books have lasted with us over the years, thinking about the Canterbury Tales. And how is that still a classic when the plot is cat shit?
Yeah. But it's
because it's a bunch
funny.
of cool characters.
Yeah.
There hadn't been that many stories then, so you could just come up with anything and someone would be entertained.
That too. But we're still entertained, aren't we?
Yeah. Connor, what do you think?
I think character-driven sort of stuff has kind of always been there, and I think similar to what Lily said, it goes in and out kind of thing. Like, it's always there. It's just whether or not it gets noticed. Like, I think, like, Mervyn Peake was publishing around the same time as Tolkien. I could be wrong about that, but like, you've got these very sort of old-fashioned sort of classic fantasy works, and Tolkien is very sort of world heavy. I wouldn't say plot heavy. Those books are really slow, but it's very world heavy. Like, the characters are sometimes a bit on the simpler side, and then you have someone like who's like Gormenghast or something like that, where it's a huge cast of people, but they're all like very like stunningly realistic and everything. And it's like one of these things clearly is lauded in a sort of higher way. A lot of people will remember it a bit, or more people will remember Lord of the Rings, but it's not because no one was writing character-driven stuff at the time. Yeah, I think especially
I have an opinion about that.
I mean, if you want to get into it, you can go ahead.
Hot
No,
takes,
I agree.
Lily.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I just have
okay.
an opinion,
We're
that's
just
all.
We'll go for it, Lily.
Oh, my first character is Gandalf. He's not the best character in Lord of the Rings, and he's not the best wizard archetype, but somehow he managed to cross those two things and become like the quintessential wizard. And I think that's because he's so basic. He's such a basic bitch. I'm sorry, Gandalf. But he's just interesting enough to stick with you a little bit. So when you think of wizards he's basic enough that you think of him first, but he's interesting enough that you keep thinking about him. And then he also is a really good example of how sassy Tolkien is, just in general. I think Gandalf has a lot of very good barbs that he throws out throughout both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, in a way that I forget. I watch the movies a lot more than I read the books, but I have reread them recently. So it's very fresh in my mind how absolutely savage both Tolkien and Gandalf as a speakerphone for Tolkien can be. And all of that adds together for a character who is very memorable, even though he's kind of just the bland wizard dude. How did he get there? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's genius in a way, because it's like it's easier to create a more general archetype that people can use as sort of like an avatar for themselves, but also like their idea of what, you know, in this case a wizard is. And I love how you call him a basic bitch. It's like poor Gandalf, but at the same time, it's like there is a lot of personality that comes through, and I think that's one of the things that they Ian McKellen and Peter Jackson, like all the people that were working on the movie, really nailed about Gandalf, because he just fucking takes Peregrine Took to task all the time, especially Peregrine, but like obviously like Merry and Pippin are kind of like the focal point of his ire. But I really love that you point that out, because it's like, yeah, on one hand he is really basic, but on the other he has such a memorable personality, and there are so many lines throughout the Lord of the Rings books and even the Hobbit where you're just like, oh damn, that sticks with me, you know.
I think most of the quoted quotes, most of the lines that I quote, at least in my household, are all from Gandalf. Like he gets the best lines in the book and also in the movies. Yeah. He's just that avatar for sassy Tolkien, and it really shines. Yeah, he has like the most tattooable dialogue in those books. I like that. He's also a total asshole. I haven't tattooed any, no, but I've seen a shitload of them. Yeah. It's like the amount of fly you fools I've seen on Instagram. I'm just like, okay, man. That's enough. That's enough incredible. Of that. Yeah. Does anyone else have any thoughts on Gandalf?
I think the reason he works so well is because he sort of harkens back to, similar to being a basic bitch, he harkens back to a very basic archetype. Like it goes as far back as
like the
as Odin and everything. Yeah, I think he's based off of like Odin in disguise and everything. He would just meet and be sort of tricksy with various mortals and everything. I think Tolkien, I think it goes back to, I think, why a lot of Tolkien stuff resonates in general. I think it's tapping into a sort of a rich vein that was already kind of there in a lot of cultures, sort of legendariums and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sarah?
I mean, I think that Lily pretty much nailed my thoughts on Gandalf as a character and what makes him memorable. So I don't know if I have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Go for it, Lily.
Add one more thing. He's also extremely manipulative and very rude.
Of course.
And I think
he's like, I came down to this world to help you all. I have to manipulate you to some degree.
Right. But that's the complexity that I needed to add that in because it supports my thesis argument.
I like bringing back the academia as much as you can, Lily. Just like,
I'm sorry, I've been training my whole life for this moment.
Quit it. All right, Sarah, do you want to give us your first pick for memorable character?
Sure. So my first pick is also from Tolkien, but Bilbo from The Hobbit, I find a very memorable character, partially in part because we just reread The Hobbit, so it's fresh on my mind. But the way that he is such like a good stand-in for the reader in the story, and the way that like you can relate to him as a child because you're going on an adventure and you're going through this like fairy tale essentially, and then when you read it as an adult you can relate because like, yeah, I don't want to have unexpected guests in my house and have them like leave dishes all over the place and I have to worry about
dirty
what I'm going to feed them. Yeah. So.
Sorry, all right. Jeez, I'll show myself out then.
Sarah's Bilbo and Connor is 12 dwarfs.
I'm just coming into her house and breaking all of her plates.
I mean, you have in fact broke some of my plates. So
That
yes.
was one time.
You
That was
filthy
one
animal.
time.
But so yes, I relate to Bilbo, and that in part makes him very memorable for me.
Do you associate Bilbo in your mind strictly with the books, or does the movie version kind of intermingle with that in any way?
I mean, I think the movie version intermingles a little bit, and I think that the prevalence of the movies probably makes Bilbo a more memorable character for a lot of people, just because like they're so big in the cultural consciousness. But I find that movie Bilbo is a little more not enthusiastic about going on an adventure, but like kind of a little more willing. And book Bilbo, I think, manifests my energy better.
It's like a consistent, like I'm on this adventure and I'm still reluctant kind of thing, which I love. You know, he's more consistently grouchy.
Yeah, and I really relate to that because like I hate leaving the house. I don't want to go on an adventure. I mean, like I'll do it if I'm forced, but like no.
You're the one who just like went on like a hiking adventure with your dad.
Yeah, but that's different.
Yeah.
That's not months and months and months.
That's true. That's true. It's like if I had to go to the Misty Mountains and like go through some dark caves and stumble across trolls and all that kind of crap.
I too would be thinking longingly of my bed at like a good dinner.
I would have just kicked it in like Rivendell. I would be like, I'm staying here with the elves. It's beautiful here.
I was going to make a joke about certain death in the Sierra Nevadas, but that is not actually a good joke to make, eh?
Oh, Lily. Read the room. Come on. Connor, what were you going to say?
I think an issue with the movies is they kind of blew their load too early in some kind of ways, where they had the ending of the first movie where he gets accepted by the dwarves and everything, and he's just kind of along for the ride at that point. It's like, you got 2 movies left. There's like 6 hours left of this whole thing, and you've already completed his character arc.
He just kind of feels like a shell.
Yeah, like there's a reason I think he sort of fades more and more into the background with each successive movie. And like,
that's true.
Well, I would disagree with that just a little bit because I think the movie, part of what makes him more memorable in the books than the movie is that like he is really the only character who's distinctive. I mean, we do get Gandalf, but like the dwarves are a unit, you know, like they don't get that much like individual time, whereas they do in the movies. So it's much more evenly distributed there.
No one in the book gets to be the sexy Aragorn kind of thing.
Yeah, but then they made like one of the dwarves, like the sexy Aragorn character, to hook up with the elf, and I'm just like, it's unnecessary, you know?
It's what you get when you order Aragon on Wish.com.
I mean, I get it. They couldn't make a trilogy of movies without a single woman in any of them. They had to do something.
Or a love triangle. They had to get that in there.
I would argue that that's not a love triangle, but the question is, does The Hobbit or the movie version of The Hobbit supersede the book version? And I would say that the movie version is so exemplary because it perfectly captures Bilbo's energy, except that he's much more adventurous because he has to be a movie hero. But his sort of disdain for everything adventure, even when he's excelling at it when his book counterpart would not be, is very good. And that's very fun. And I think Martin Freeman captured who Bilbo is in my mind.
I just love Martin Freeman. He's great.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's a cutie, you know? He's just adorable.
Yeah.
And Connor, what about you? What's your first pick?
I did Fitz from The Realm of the Elderlings.
Nice.
It just, I've never seen a point of view done that sort of thoroughly. I remember reading the first book, and there's a certain thing that happens, like I think in the first third, where the plot sort of pivots, and you realize that everything you thought you had been reading had been sort of like, you couldn't have seen the full picture because of because of the age of the narrator and because of how old Fitz is and how much information he has about the world. and then suddenly someone comes in and explains things to you, and everything shifts. And I'd never seen anything sort of like that before. Where it was this internal consistency, and where you can go back and be like, oh, it makes sense. He just doesn't have the language to describe what's happening to him. And it's this,
right.
And I think the whole book kind of does that. Like every book Robin Hobb writes kind of does that, where it's like, there are times where you will read a thing and Fitz is talking about how it's this great victory lap, and you're like, this is not like the sort of triumph you think it is. You're re-traumatizing a lot of people, sir. And it's like, it never gets addressed, because clearly he thinks that it's like a good thing he's doing, but like you can see that everyone else is sort of not having the best time with all of this. And it's just, he's the most sort of stunningly realistic character I've ever read, to the point where it's like, I don't necessarily even remember the plot of the book that well. It's just sort of thinking, it feels more like thinking back on stuff you actually lived through with a couple friends. It's incredible. I've never seen any book that can replicate that kind of in-depth character work.
Yeah, I've never read that series. I haven't read any Robin Hobb, but it's kind of like, I got thrown off by the misleading title. It's like Assassin's Apprentice.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm on board. And then I read the plot, and then I read like reviews, and everyone's just like, this is very much a character driven story. Cool.
Oh yeah.
But it's more like palace intrigue and like that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know. But then, I hear people say stuff like what you just said and think like, okay, I should pick up some Robin Hobb. Yeah.
It's so good.
Sarah, Lily, have either of you read any of those books?
I've not read any Robin Hobb, so I can't comment, unfortunately.
Lily?
Well, I would like to use this opportunity to argue that Connor agrees with me that the most memorable characters are the ones that are a little bit complicated and that make you think, and aren't necessarily the ones that you wholeheartedly love with all your being, because that's too simple. And then you move on because you're like, yeah, I love you. Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm of two minds about that, because I love Fitz with every fiber of my heart, but there are also times where I just want to slap him.
Exactly.
I think it's because they're so they can be so fucked up, is why you can get such a deep connection with those kinds of characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then it really strikes me that the plot just became this like very like diffuse thing for you, that it just kind of filtered away as your love for Fitz lingered in your memory for so much longer than anything that was going on around him. It's just like that to me is really striking.
A lot of the reason I think the character work works so well is because the stakes in almost every scene are extremely low, but they all build to a bigger thing, like as they go. Not necessarily that the stakes get raised, but like the successive sort of small stakes things like stack up and everything.
Mm-hmm.
As you see the formation of a person, that like the formation of a person ends up becoming the plot, like ends up making it like some of the most tense shit you've ever read. Like I remember reading a certain point in the first book where there's a dog that's choking on a chicken bone, and he's got to reach down its throat to get it out. And it was one of the most tense things I've ever read. And it's like, those stakes are basically just, there's one dog. That's the entire. It does, like, if the dog chokes, like the realm isn't going to fall or anything like that.
But I would argue that anything with a dog is inherently higher stakes, because one is like
emotional investment.
There's an emotional investment in something happening to an animal.
I'm not going to dispute that at all. I'm just like, it's not like grand stakes, but it is very personal stakes, which is exactly what she does so well, and why all the stakes are extremely personal. And so even when there's a bigger thing at risk, you feel like the personal sort of cost of all of it to a greater degree. And
isn't he like the main character over the course of 2 trilogies or something like that?
3
trilogies. Okay, so you got like some serious character development with Fitz.
Oh my God, yeah. There's like decades of character development. It's insane.
Okay. So yeah, like in that case, it's like hundreds and hundreds of pages. I mean, thousands of pages at that point of like this character, and he's the only POV, or are there any other POVs in those books?
There's a second POV in the last trilogy, and she comes in about I think halfway through the first book.
Okay, so yeah, that gives you a lot of time to be like, I'm gonna get all cozy with Fitz, even if he does some pretty messed up shit.
There's like, I'm currently in the process of reading the last trilogy, and there are just moments where like in the first book in the last trilogy, there'll just be a little moment where like someone he's like 50 or 60 at this point, and like there will be a moment where like a younger character that he's mentored is like, so, like he's gone off from a larger party, and like a younger character he mentors catches up with him, and it's like, I'm coming with you, because if I don't, you're going to isolate yourself because you feel sad and you're punishing yourself because you think you made a mistake. And it's just sort of like, oh, he does do that. That's just like him.
And internally, Connor's just like, I do that too.
Wow, I didn't even. Oh, it's great because it's like, notice that he's doing it until someone points it out, and then you pull back and you're like, wait, he's not acknowledging it to himself, so I wasn't able to see it earlier. But yeah, of course he's doing that. Exactly. Holy shit. It's great. Man.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah, and you're bringing up so many points that correlate with my first pick, which is Shay, like Call Shay from the Greenbone saga by Fonda Lee. And I love those books so much. And she's like, so the family of like, you know, I wouldn't even call them like gangsters or anything like that. They're pseudo gangsters. It's like a crime family, but with more of a morally gray world that encompasses their morally gray family. And so it's like they're very much a product of the world that they live in. And all of these characters, so there's like Shay, her brother Hilo, and her other brother Lan, and then their half brother, or I think it's a half brother, Andon, or he's like related to them in some sort of way, but not like directly one of their siblings. The family is just so fucked up in all the best ways. And it's exactly what you've been talking about, Lily, and Connor, what you've been bringing up as well. It's like, these are characters who do some pretty horrendous things, you know? And the way that it works in Jade City, as it goes from book 1 into Jade War book 2 and into book 3, Jade Legacy, it's like Shay is kind of this, she's part of the family, but she chose to go live in another country and study abroad and work abroad. And then she comes back to visit the family and just gets roped back into everything. And then you just see like her corruption over the course of 3 books. But it's not like such a blatant corruption that someone from the outside could be like, you're bad or anything like that. All of the actions that she takes are so purposeful and so integrated into like the fabric of her family, and the way that this crime family competes with another crime family, and the way all of that works into like the political machinations that are going on in this country, and all like the gangster stuff that's like underlying everything. It's just like, oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, but it's despicable at the same time. And it's just like, she sticks with me for that reason, because it's like, you are the one who wanted to be outside of this, and you just got pulled right back in. And she fights it over and over and over again. But then there are points where it's like family pride. Like there's this one scene in book 2, Jade War, where it's like, you know, Shay's really accomplished as a fighter, in terms of like using these, you know, they have these blades, but there's also, you know, like martial arts, combat styles and stuff like that. She's super accomplished. And then when it comes down to it, just because of pride, she gets into like a knife duel with the leader of the other crime family. And it's so fucking cool. And it's so brutal. And it's just like this person who really does not want to do it has like convinced herself that it is the only acceptable option in order to like save face on a public level, but also to like save face for her family, and then also save face for herself. And all of her actions, it's just like she becomes more and more like corrupted, but in very, very subtle ways. And Connor, like you're saying, Fitz, over the course of all these books, you're seeing the ways in which his personality kind of like emanates onto other characters, and they tend to point out the things that's like, no, man, like you did something bad, or like you don't understand the situation. And Shay is just like in the thick of it with all of this gangster crap that's going on with like, you know, the family is investing in different markets and different companies and all this kind of stuff. And it's like the corporatization of gangsterism in a sense.
Ooh.
And she's essentially like the business manager of the whole enterprise. And so she's the one who's like pulling these strings behind the scenes in terms of like, this is how we're going to like ship drugs or like something to another country, or this is how we're going to like launder our money and all this kind of stuff. And then certain characters, especially like a love interest that develops over one of the books, points out, it's just like, your family's horrible. You're horrible. I'm out, you know? And then horrible shit ends up happening to him. And I'm just like, no, dude, you wanted out, but you were in it because you loved this horrible human being. And all of that just makes me like that series lingers with me so heavy. And it's like Shay is one of the linchpins that carries that series. Like Hilo, her brother, is also really amazing, but I think he's too he was like too entrenched in it at the beginning for me to see as much of like a compelling arc over the course of the books, whereas she was like an insider that chose to be an outsider but then got roped back into being an insider, and that corruption arc was just beautiful. It's like I really love those books. And Shay is just, it's like morally despicable people, but for some reason that just makes it like that much more memorable because of these small actions or these big actions that really hit you hard. And then by the end of the series, it's just like everything comes full circle, and it's like, oh damn. Anyways,
I don't know. I think it's really interesting that you really enjoy morally gray characters and find that they linger with you, because looking over my list and trying to think back on the characters that stay with me, and maybe this is just like part reading preference, but like the morally gray characters, I tend not to like them, and I tend not to like linger over them because I'm like, you sucked. You were horrible. You're a horrible person. Why should I care about you? Like, why should I give you the brain space?
That just speaks more about me than anything.
Well, the question that I had listening to your discussion was, do you think that you loved the character and remembered the character because they embodied a book that you loved? Or do you think it was just because of the character themselves? And are those two different things? Maybe that's just the same thing.
I mean, for me, it's really hard to separate the two, you know? Because like for you, Connor, the fact that Fitz kind of separated himself quite a lot from the actual plot of those books. Like Shay and the overarching plot of the Greenbone saga are so intertwined for me that it's like the impact of the plot itself was a result of the characters and the actions that Fonda Lee chose to give them. So it's like, for me, those two things are, at least in the case of the Greenbone saga, it's like those are inseparable. Like it's like usually I tend to latch on to a character that gives their world and their plot as much effective power as that story can possibly put onto the page. And so for me, it's like Shay was such an effective character in the way that she was written, to be like all of your despicable actions, but also all of like the heartwarming stuff that she went through, and like all the love that was evident throughout the pages, and the heartbreak and the struggle that she went through, like emotionally. All of that was so directly tied into what was going on throughout the trilogy that it's like, I can't separate those two.
I could listen to you gush about this for like the whole podcast.
Well, I got two more, buddy. We'll toss it back to Lily for her second pick.
Okay. Two of the picks of mine are from stories I don't actually like that much.
That's totally fine.
Should I skip? I don't want to skip Adam though. So just know that they're coming.
Tell me, but I also want to know why was the character so memorable for you in comparison to a story that you didn't really latch onto or didn't really end up caring?
No, because the stories made me mad. That's not. You said memorable.
Interesting.
You said memorable.
Okay. Well, tell me. Why is the character?
No, we'll get there.
Why do you like the character, and why does the story make you mad?
Should I just jump to Gideon from Gideon the Ninth then?
Go for it.
Oh my God.
Let's get into it.
A very memorable character who I think about constantly even today, even though I read the book over a year ago. I have very mixed opinions on the story itself. Very well-written book, very good book. I just didn't necessarily like it. And those were two different things.
Yeah.
And
that's
we
not
have
the point.
We have only read the first book. We haven't read any of the other books in the series.
Okay.
Yes, we're strictly
In
talking about
case
Gideon the
Pharaoh.
Ninth.
Yeah.
But the question was memorable characters. And part of what makes Gideon memorable is the very mixed emotions I have about the ending of her story. It lingers because maybe I'm wrong. So many people love that book. Maybe I'm the wrong one. I don't know. And so I think about it all the time. And it does have that element that Sara brought up earlier about relatability. Gideon is so, herself. And so very relatable in many ways. And just horny enough that it's funny without being weird. And like so many things should have made Gideon a forgettable character for me because I forget the characters that I love with no complexity. But because I was so mad about some things that happened in that book, I remember her.
That's really cool, though. I think like the fact that your distaste for whatever happened in that story, I haven't read Gideon the Ninth, so I can't comment directly and know exactly what you're talking about. But I think it's really cool that, like, you know, you related to this character in certain ways. I like that you say just horny enough. That's a really good touch. But like, why do you think it is that things that the character did that relate to the story made that character that much more memorable?
Well, I think for me, when I have a character that is so easily loved for so long, that's not very thoughtful, right? Yeah, I love her. Great. Whatever. Goodbye. And then when something happens in the story that isn't necessarily out of character, but I have many opinions about, and I really don't want to spoil this because it's a good book despite my many opinions.
If you want to hear Lily's opinions, you can listen to our episode on Gideon the Ninth.
Yeah,
I'm just going to make everyone mad at me.
I'm definitely going to link to that in the YouTube video.
Everyone's going to get mad at me.
It's such a good episode. I like it a lot.
We argue an awful lot in that episode.
Well,
that's why it's my favorite.
Sara, what's your take? Just, you know, obviously you two have talked about this before, but like, do you like Gideon as a character, and were you as equally annoyed by those moments in the story?
No. So basically, Lily and I disagree about everything in this book, except for the fact that Gideon is a memorable character. I agree there. I think she's very memorable, partly because she's so recognizable to a modern audience. Like, she's a very modern character in many ways, like speech, her horniness, like all of that means that she's very recognizable.
Invented horny in some of the earlier works.
Yes, horny never existed until Gideon.
Yeah.
But I think that what makes a character memorable is having this like emotion engendered in you. And so while I wouldn't consider her as memorable, like she didn't make my list, whereas she did Lily's, but I think Lily has stronger like just stronger feelings about the book because of the unhappiness at points of the story. Whereas I'm like, oh yeah, it was great. I liked it.
Yeah, it's like the character investment versus, it's like this Venn diagram of like, on one side, investment in the character, and on the other, annoyance. And it's just like that moment where they cross and you're just like, fuck. Why? Just why?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to have some element of complexity. And for Gideon's element of complexity, it is my emotions about how the book ends.
Yeah, that is totally fair. Connor, have you read that book?
I read that and Harrow, and I kind of think I think Lily might like Harrow a lot because it basically is all about exploring that choice at the end. It's so fucking good. It's Gideon and Harrow are some of my favorite things. In part because like Tamsin Muir has this amazing talent to every book she writes. I mean, I've only read the two. I haven't gotten to Nona yet, but so far of these two, each book is written from the least helpful possible perspective. Just like, you wanted to know what's happening? Fuck you. No, you got to get to the end of this book, and then I'll wrap it up for you. And maybe not even then. Maybe I'll leave you with a cliffhanger, and you have to figure out what the fuck any of this means. But it's like, it's done in this way where it's just sort of like kind of great. Like if anyone less talented even tried to do it, it would have just blown up. But like, she's so talented, it's just like, I kind of love it. It's great.
That's amazing. It's like the forced inconvenience.
Yes, it's so good. I love it a lot.
Just deal with it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of fits well with like the whole goth punk aesthetic of it. So
yeah,
it's like just buck up, bitch, and read the book.
Yeah.
Sarah, what's your second pick?
So my second pick is Cimmerian from The Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reed, which is a middle. I would probably characterize it as like a middle grade book, written. I don't know when exactly, but written long enough ago that I read it as a child. And Cimmerian has always stuck with me for being so like no nonsense. Like, she's a princess, but she does her own thing. And she was a great like role model character for a young girl.
Yeah.
And so she's stuck with me because of that.
I have never read those books before. But
I'm not surprised by that.
But like, have you gone back to read those books like later on?
I do occasionally.
Okay.
I mean, not on a super regular basis. I think the last time I read them was a couple of years ago when I was sick and I wanted something as like a comfort read.
Mm-hmm.
And like Cimmerian and her storyline still holds up. Which is not something that all of my childhood books can say.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that like, what was it like for you the first time? Because there are some books that I've gone back and read when I loved them as a child, and I've gone back just sort of out of this nostalgic resonance that I was like, you know, like you said, like, I want a comfort read, or I want something that it's like, I just loved back in the day. But when you first read those books, coming back to them as an adult, did you find anything more there? Did you find that it was like just as satisfying, but new in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really appreciated, again, the fact that I could still enjoy them, and that Cimmerian was still this independent, like fierce independent character who had, like, she was like she has her initial in the first book. She's like a princess for a dragon. She runs away from being a regular princess and she's like, fuck that. Which valid.
Of course.
And but then she also, like, you also get to explore her character as a mother, because you see her in later books. Like, you see her son and their interactions. So you kind of get the whole range of life experiences from her. in a way that makes her, I think, a lot more well-rounded as a character than some, middle grade stories.
That's so cool though, because I love it when there are characters who come back older, and that actually ties into my pick, but my second pick. But I love being able to see like, okay, I read through all of the things that influenced you leading into your adulthood, and then to see you as an adult, especially as a parent, to be like, what all that trauma do to you, huh?
I mean, and to be fair, like,
it's probably not that
Cimmerian,
traumatic, but
Cimmerian doesn't have, like, there's some trauma, but it's, a story for younger readers, so it's not that traumatic.
Yeah.
And the story mostly focuses, when it gets to that point, it mostly focuses on the adventures of her son. But it is, we do still get to see them like together a little bit, and so it is fascinating to kind of come back to that and see how far she's grown as a character from when we first meet her as a 14 or 15-year-old, however old she is.
Very nice. Lily, have you read those books?
I have. Oh, okay. First, I have to issue a public apology to Sara. Because, well, this is also an interesting point, because while Cimmerian is a very memorable character who I think has strongly imprinted on my psyche, when Sara just threw out the name Cimmerian, I thought she was going to try to argue that some rando elf from the Silmarillion was memorable. And I was like, excuse me? I think my exact words were good luck.
Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing I thought too. I was just like, Cimmerian? I'm like, okay. Is it another Lord of the Rings character? Let's hear it.
Yeah. But no, Cimmerian from the Enchanted Forest series is an extremely wonderful character whose name I could not have told you until Sara reminded me yesterday. And so that's, I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm just bad with names, but I could tell you an incredible quote very early in the first book, when she's being the anti-princess and still like having conflict with her family. And her mother says, princesses don't do that. And she says, but aren't I a princess? And her mother says, oh yes, darling, of course, thinking everything was fine. And then she says, well, I do that, and therefore princesses do that. And it's a wonderful moment. That's and I love her. And I can still say that today, and I haven't read it since I was a child. So clearly, memorable character. Had no idea who Cimmerian was.
No, but it's like the fact that you can quote that moment is really telling.
Yeah.
And speaking of princesses, Connor, what's your next pick?
I'll take it. It actually is. It's Queen Talion from the Bitch Queen series.
Nice.
It's
shout out to Kay. She's awesome.
Yeah. It's so fucking good. I love it for a lot of the same reasons I love Fitz, because like she does very similar things with point of view, where it's like sometimes you get so caught up in her headspace that you don't notice that like the way Kay does it that makes it different is like sometimes Talion will hold back on you. And if you're paying close enough attention, sometimes you'll be like, now hold up. That doesn't track with this other thing you said. Mm-hmm. But you are insisting that it's this thing. Wait, now hold on. What are you not telling us? And it's like, it's this whole thing. Like the first book is an exercise in someone who really doesn't want to go there. And then everything pushes her until eventually at the end she has to basically be like, yeah, I've been keeping a secret. So this is actually what happened here. And it just recontextualizes everything else that was happening in the book. And it's so fucking good. It's so great. It's similar to the twist in the first third of Assassin's Apprentice, but whereas Assassin's Apprentice only recontextualizes the first third of the book, this does it for like the whole first plot. And I think there is a lot more plot in the Bitch Queen series, and I think it works really, really well because the plot almost becomes this metaphor for like the character's inner journey, and it's really, really great. These two, it's one of those examples where the two are just literally inseparable. Where like with I'm doing a lot of comparing and contrasting just because I think the Robin, Hobb, and Kay are like very similar in their approaches, but there are some diverging points that I think are really interesting in regards to the intertextuality in there. Because like whereas with Fitz, like the story is basically his progression as a character and just the story of his life. I think there are a lot more set goals that Talion has to achieve.
Mm.
And I really like the way that like even from like a geographic standpoint, there's like this gulf between her and her son geographically, and it almost becomes a sort of like it almost becomes an extended metaphor for her own relationship to her past in a way, because she only starts to reconcile it after she gets back to her son. It's just really, it's bullshit. It's actually character work. Surprise. It's so good. I love it a lot.
The geographical point that you brought up, I love the world that Kay created in the Bitch Queen series. And there's just so many, I mean, once again, coming back to me, there's just so many like shitty people, but they're so memorable because of their just extremely unique personalities. Like the one that really sticks out to me, there's like in the first book where she has to go to this town to ask for the help of the prince, and the prince just turns out to be this just absolute piece of shit. But the manipulative games that they're playing with each other end up being this insanely captivating cat and mouse sort of like,
it's so good.
Oh, just like one person trying to out manipulate the other, and it's just so good.
That's the prince I'm thinking of. I feel like he's another memorable character. Even like now that I think of it, that guy might also. I feel like that guy makes the list. Like in terms,
I can't remember his name, but he's just like
I can't remember.
Does.
Oh God, I'm trying to remember. I fucking it's just.
That goes to Lily's point about needing to separate memorable character from a character you remember the name of.
Exactly.
Because they're not always the same thing.
Their actions are often more memorable than what their name is. Yeah.
This dude was like fucking one of the best villains I've ever read.
So good. So good.
Just like grossly, horrifically uncomfortable. And then he gets this monologue at the end of the third book that's just like, oh shit, hang on a minute. I think this was the point of the whole trilogy. I love that. It's so good.
Oh man, yeah, I highly recommend that series for anyone. It's like that one is very much very internal inside the POV's head, and a lot of it is so character driven. But like you said, there's a lot of complexity there that I think it's well worth exploring, even for people who are a little more like, oh, I don't like such intense, in internality with my stories and my characters and that kind of thing. But it's like,
I think I wrote a review of it back in March where I called her like the greatest character writer currently alive, and I stand by that. It's so good.
Better than Joe Abercrombie.
I mean, I'll put money on that.
Yeah.
I think so, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's all personal taste. I like Kay's writing more than Joe's, but sorry, Joe. He's probably not listening. So who cares?
Uh-oh.
Isn't that freeing? You can say whatever you want.
Yeah, it's my podcast. It's fine. But I think my next pick is James Holden from the Expanse series. But it's a very interesting thing because James Holden is not necessarily my favorite character. And Lily, this really ties into a lot of what we've been talking about throughout this whole thing. But he is the loci for this entire series, and he is the foil through which all of the best characters in this series blossom. He's like the garden, and everyone blossoms because of his actions, because he's such an impulsive dude. He's very much like a hero stereotype, like the archetypical hero who just like such his moral compass is such that anytime there's a damsel in distress, let's say, but it's like, you know, galaxy threatening stuff, or like weird alien artifacts and like all this different kind of things, it's like he is the person that is just like, yeah, we got to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily like his personality is so wow or anything like that, but you know, Naomi, his partner, or Amos, who is the best character in the entire series, both the book and TV series. Amos is amazing and so complex, but none of that would be possible were it not for James Holden. And so I think for me, he's so memorable because he is the one who allowed these other characters to come to the most satisfying endpoint for their character arcs. And, you know, with Sarah, you're talking about Cimarine, I think that's her name. Yeah, I'm just going to call her like not Elf. At least I got her name right. It's fine. How you got to see her as an adult and you got to see like her son and everything like that. There's this time jump from book 6 to 7 in the Expanse series, and it jumps ahead 30 years. And so you get to see these characters like develop. They just do such a good job of, even though there's a 30-year time jump, the characters have such a satisfying development, even though it's not on the page, it's just referenced and it's just comes through in terms of character work and dialogue and all that kind of stuff. But to see these characters who are like, you know, James Holden, the hero, everything, you know, save the galaxy kind of personality type, basically have to contend with old age, really adds an extra layer of finesse and interest for me as a reader to see like how all these characters cope with aging and just having to deal with, you know, the expanding politics of the galaxy and all this kind of stuff. And James is always the one who just throws them into the shit, and then all the other characters are the ones who have, for me, the insanely fascinating and engaging character development as a result of his actions. So I really love that. And they also did a good job of portraying all of that in the TV show as well. It's like he's the foil for just insanely good character work and world building and all this different kind of stuff, even if he is a pretty bland dude, just like on a fundamental level. But that's what makes him so memorable, and I love that. So I don't know if anyone else is. Go ahead, Lily.
I haven't read the books yet, but I have seen the show, and it sounds like they're pretty similar, at least in the beginning.
It's because the the co-authors of the series were executive producers, and they were like in sync with the showrunner. So, well,
then I feel like I can still talk about it.
Yes,
I think that's very close to my argument about Gandalf, though, because the character themselves are not necessarily the most interesting of the show, but they are one of the best examples of their archetype, and just interesting enough that they rise above the rest and makes them so much more. I agree completely. Like, Amos is definitely my favorite character,
so good.
But I would agree that Holden is probably the one that I end up talking about more, which is maybe not the best analog for memorable, but I think it's a pretty good one. Because there's just so much more complexity and, you know, complaining about his decisions and his choices and how they affect the people around him. You end up thinking about him more, remembering him more after you're done watching the show. Whereas when I'm watching the show, I'm like, fuck yeah, Amos.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, Amos is so good. And it's like, once you learn more about his backstory, I'm just like, oh, love this character so much. And they did a really good job of just like keeping that character tight to what goes on in the books and everything like that. But yeah, it's like Holden is the linchpin for everything that goes on in the Expanse series. And if it wasn't for him, it's like no one would be doing interesting shit. They'd just be hauling ice between asteroids and planets. And it's like, wow, that's fun. But he's the one who just embroils them and everything. And I think it's a really interesting point that you said. It's like everyone talks about him the most, but what's most interesting is what everyone does because of what he has done. So it's like,
Mhm.
you know, he's the most memorable catalyst in science fiction and fantasy for me.
Mhm.
I think
He's almost a Gary Stu, right? He's like
Yeah.
almost too perfect, but I think they do enough to get him over that hump that it's
Yeah.
not gross.
Yeah, and he just loves
Mhm.
coffee. It's like, cool, man. Coffee's good. You know, I don't know how coffee tastes in space, but Lily, what's your next choice?
Oh, Adam, who I would like to say needs no introduction, but does, because this character is so memorable, people assume he's the titular character. I'm, of course, talking about not Frankenstein from Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. How can you argue that anyone else is more memorable when, like, everyone talks about Adam when they talk
Mhm.
about Frankenstein?
Yeah.
And it's not even what the book is about, or who the book is about, technically. But you also get that complexity of he's clearly the victim of his circumstances. I don't know how you could argue otherwise. But he also murders children. I'm allowed to spoil Frankenstein, right? That book's old enough.
If you haven't read it yet, that's on you.
Yeah, so go read Frankenstein. It's like 200 years old or something. I don't know how old it is.
Yeah. It's like 10 pages long. It'll take an afternoon. Go read it. It's worth it.
It's not that short.
No, it's like 100 and it's like around 150.
It's very short.
Yeah.
But the fact that this, not just the story, not just the book, right? All of the adaptations, everything everyone knows about this book is about Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not even like, everyone thinks his name is Frankenstein. And I know part of that is just pop culture laziness, but I also think that there's something very telling in that he is the most compelling part of the story, even though Shelley was trying to talk about, you know, the curse of creation and the responsibility that you bear. And there's a lot going on. But what you remember is this poor man in over his head, trying his best and doing the worst.
Yeah. And I think it's like, it's so cool because that whole story feeds into like just the nature of humanity and of creation and all of this. And then it's like, I think like what you say, it's so fascinating that like pop culture has just kind of obfuscated the reality of this story and just kind of brought it into this nature of I don't know. I think there was like the movie that came out in like the 1920s or something like that, 1920s and 1930s, that kind of started this role of like almost goofiness around the character, but that takes away from the sheer depth of the conversation that this book is trying to have about like, you know, what it means to be human and what, you know, a creation versus its creator, where that line blurs in terms of, I guess we're talking about morality a lot here, but it's like humans are fucked up creatures, and it's like the creator is just as fucked up as the creation. And, you know, the movies and pop culture and everything like that have just kind of created this like really, for me growing up, it's like, yeah, it's just this goofy ass character with like studs in his neck and he's green and he just walks around like this, and it's just like, no man, the actual like the original book is so much cooler than any recreation or any adaptation has ever been able to accomplish on the same level.
See, I think I would argue that the culture that has grown up around Frankenstein and Adam like kind of dilutes that like memorability of the character, because when people think about Frankenstein's monster, they're not thinking about what we see in the book. They're thinking about often they're thinking about what we see in popular culture, which is not the same thing.
Yeah.
I would argue that is not a dilution, that is an echo. That we are just seeing how far reaching that character is. I mean, a lot of the characters we've talked about today, the average person wouldn't necessarily know. Whereas this character is so memorable, even distorted, it has reached beyond people who've even read the book.
True.
Like
True.
Frankenstein homeopathy.
Exactly.
I guarantee that the majority of people, like 99% of the people who know Frankenstein, have probably never read the book, nor do they know who Mary Shelley is.
Well, and they also think that Frankenstein is the monster.
Exactly.
And not the creator.
He could well be the monster.
I mean, if you want to just turn this into let's talk about Frankenstein for another 2 hours, I got time.
you got to invite me to fiction fans for that.
We will put that on the calendar.
That'd be a good discussion topic. Yeah. I'm loving this. Sarah,
so the fact that he's so complicated that we can argue about, well, are they even remembering the right Adam and Frankenstein, whatever. That's okay. Maybe my definition of memorable is skewed, but the fact that the character brings up all of this, that people are talking about this character, they are remembering about this character wrong or, accurately or not, that still means that this character has resonated with so many people that maybe haven't even read the book.
I think
even if that resonance is an echo, like you said.
Yeah.
I think it means that the work as a whole has resonated, not necessarily the character.
But for me, it's like when I read Frankenstein, I was like, Adam is what resonated with me the most.
Right. But I'm saying that like the character resonates when you read the book, but like overall in the general consciousness, it's the work as a whole and not the specific character.
Or maybe not even the work as a whole, but like a broader metaphor
of
what that book is.
Maybe I'm just splitting hairs. It's possible.
I think this is a very good conversation that should be had in depth, frankly.
Yeah.
But
let's save it for fiction fans.
It's maybe out of scope of this conversation.
But just bringing this up brought up so many discussions and disagreements. And doesn't that mean something?
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect. And it's really that for me is like, that is what a memorable character does. It's like different opinions and, the kind of thing that transcends the book itself, and Frankenstein, the monster, Adam, is so beyond that book at this point, to the point where it's like kids go out on Halloween dressed as Frankenstein. It's like they have no idea like the history of this character or the meaning behind it, and the parents probably don't give a shit either. They're just like, oh yeah, Frankenstein's fun, like whatever. It's like this man who's all sewn up together and like walks in a certain way. But I think, yeah, damn, that's a really good one, Lily. Oof. All right, Sarah, what's your next?
So my next is the character of Death from Discworld by Terry Pratchett. And I think Death is incredibly memorable, both because he is a personification of like an idea, essentially. And also just the way that he presents in the story with talking in all caps, like it all makes for a character that you remember when you read Discworld. Plus he's like super relatable. He loves cats. He's a little offbeat. He's charming in, again, a kind of offbeat way.
I think he's like the perfect personification of like modern masculinity in a way where there's
wait, can we make that true?
I mean, maybe not like modern, maybe like 2010 masculinity, but it's just like, he's so quirky and so, like reading Death for the first time when I read Mort, and I was like, I relate to this guy so much, like Mort is such a doofus, but Death, it's like, I vibe with you, man. Like you embody me. Maybe I'm not like a stereotypical modern man either.
I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that, because like Terry Pratchett started writing the Discworld series in the like 70s or 80s.
Exactly.
So it's I think one of the most impressive things about it is how long lasting it's been and how these books are still so relevant and so memorable.
Mm-hmm. But I think that comes with humor. Like if you really nail humor's the kind of thing that can really, certain times, I think stand-up comedy from like the 40s or 50s is like pretty terrible at this point, but it's like the way that he blends fantasy and humor is the kind of thing that it's just like there's no like temporal fallout from that kind of aesthetic and that kind of writing style that he has.
Well, fantasy and humor and social commentary, because all of his books, or many of his books, are just like, he has a lot of really relevant things to say about society, and they don't always land. Some of his books are not great, but most of the time, I think the social commentary is quite on point.
And I think the ones with death definitely are the ones that are most like relevant today. Because it's like like you say, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really land, but it's like I read those death books and I'm like, it just feels good, you know? It feels so relatable. Lily?
I think there's also that element, not to say that I'm always right all the time or anything, but the Grim Reaper is not a new concept.
Yeah.
This is an archetype that we've seen many times. But Death by Terry Pratchett is probably the most memorable version of that, or an exceptional version of that. And there is some intersection of something we've seen done a lot, so we care about the different versions. Because if a character is too unique, then they just go away. They blow away in the breeze.
I think it goes back. I mean, I will admit that it relates to your point about archetypes, but I also think that it comes back to my point about relatability, because Death as a character is relatable. I mean, he's awkward. Like he's sick and tired of his job at points. He loves cats. He just wants to like go away and do his own thing and have a vacation. Like who can't relate to that?
But I think that's why this is the version of Death that sticks.
Right.
Because of that.
But I think you need, I'm saying that
a balance.
You need both, right? Like,
it can't just be an archetype. You have to have something interesting about it. Gandalf is a sassy pants.
And
Death is also
relatability.
A sassy demigod.
Yeah.
I really like that. I need to read more Terry Pratchett. I got some of those nice like Galanch, those like colorful hardcovers. Just like those. Those so beautiful.
Those covers are just gorgeous.
Terry Pratchett yet.
Oh, Connor, get on it, man. Give us your next pick. Just go fucking read Terry Pratchett.
I know. I gotta.
I can't believe you've been in my house for 4.5 months, and you haven't read Terry Pratchett.
It's a travesty.
I know. I'll just see myself out in shame.
You broke a plate and you haven't read Terry Pratchett. What is wrong with you?
I'm the worst house guest.
You are actually in Hotel California, and you cannot leave until you read Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
I mean, where you're sitting in the house right now, just stare at the shelf of Terry Pratchett that's eye level.
Literally.
All right, Connor, what's your next pick?
Morpheus.
Yes.
He's just literally just I think
speaking of death.
Yeah. One of the subtlest examples of character work, I think, because like I think especially I give it credit for the medium that it's in, where it's not a medium that was especially at the time known for its complexity of character work. And then like Neil Gaiman comes in and it's like he's just a sad, wet cat of a man. He's just I just picture him
feeding
out
pigeons
in the rain somewhere. Literally. It's just it's almost like similar to like a Greek god almost, in terms of like the whole every arc is just about how far is he willing to change, and like what is it going to cost him and everything, and when is he going to refuse to change and everything. It's just every bit about it is just sort of like really subtly drawn. Like there were times where I'm like, I don't quite know where this is going, or like it was doing something new for me, and it's just I think I mentioned this in the Sandman podcast, where the bit in hell where he's like, it's been 10,000 years and I don't forgive, I still love you, but I don't forgive you. Or it's just sort of like,
Yeah.
I'd never read anything.
Eternal pettiness.
Literally. It's just, and especially for a comic book, to make your main character do something like that fucked up,
Mhm.
and then still have them be generally kind of likable and everything, is just, it's almost like, it feels like, just because of the length that this guy has been around, his flaws and his noble attributes are almost like both compounded. There's like an exponent next to it, and it's just, God, it's just really great character work.
Yeah, there's just like such a starkness to Morpheus, because it's like I told you before we were recording that I finished volume 6 of my reread of The Sandman, and he goes to his son's wedding, and it's just like, talk about fucking brutal, but it's just like all the shit that his son Orpheus goes through, and he's willing to like leave his son on a beach, turn around and walk away.
Literally.
And I'm like, dude, oh, just like it gave me like goosebumps, just like the sheer just callousness of it. I'm like, oh man. But then there's so much complexity to that character, because there are times when it's just like he's very almost like warm, and there's sparks of humanity within him, and then other times where his coldness is brutal.
Yeah, it's, oh God, it's so good. I love it so much. I could talk about it forever.
I love it too. Sarah, Lily, have you either of you read the comics or at least seen the TV show?
I haven't read the comics, but I did watch the TV show and really enjoyed it.
Twice.
Yes, twice.
Did Connor force you to watch it with him?
It was less of a forcing and more of a, hey, let's do this. And I was already interested in watching it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a little bit sweeter than forcing you to watch.
Yeah. I'm just picturing a Clockwork Orange, just the eyes suspended open.
You will
watch it, damn it.
It's 4 a.m. Just watch it. Lily, have you watched the show or seen or read the comics?
Yes, I read some amount of the comics when I was in high school. I met Death. That's as far as I got.
Okay.
But have not read them since, so fuzzy memories. But I remember Death. So I would actually argue that Death is more but that's as much as I read, so who knows.
Death is very memorable, though.
I love her.
Mm-hmm.
Very recently finished the show on Netflix. I got very, very bored when Morpheus was no longer involved in the show. Not no longer involved, but that last arc was way too slow. I
agree. The show is better when Morpheus is there, but I have a weakness for black-haired kind of petty British men. So,
well, I hesitated to pick anyone from Sandman because I had seen it so recently. I didn't trust myself to actually consider them memorable. I was like, are they memorable, or did I just watch this show yesterday?
That's totally fair. Yeah,
I think the reason it sticks with me is Season of Mists absolutely fucked my brain up. It like made me a better person and taught me to be kinder to myself.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, and it's just like that really stuck with me. There's a specific scene in hell in that arc that is just like there's this one dude who is this medieval warlord, and he's just chained to a rock. And he's talking about how horrible of a life he lived and all the terrible things he did. And Lucifer's like, it has been like 7,000 years since you've been here. No one knows who you are anymore. You're gone from all the history books. No one cares about you anymore.
And
just
he's still
shut up
rattling on.
Yeah, literally, he's just like, shut up and forgive yourself. God damn it. And literally just, there's like a close-up of his eyes, and then he's just gone. There's just a bunch of chains dropping down from the rock. It's like, that is just seared into my memory. It's such a great little sequence.
Yeah, but that's something beautiful about the Sandman, is the fact that like this little segue, this little like flash in the pan is enough to leave such an imprint on you.
Yeah.
You know? And it's the fact that it's like this sort of serial nature of the series really lends credence to this like capability of being like, here's this like literally like 2 panels or like less than a page a lot of the times. Like, this is gonna just like haunt you, or this is gonna linger, this is gonna just impact you in some pretty insane ways.
It's so good.
And Connor, you and I had like a conversation just over Twitter DM, and this is my next pick as well. The way that Sandman impacted you is the way that Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation impacted me.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
The biologist, who is the main character in that series. Holy crap. That is just like one of those books that conceptually, even the whole series, so Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. Those books are just so conceptually like twisty and manipulative, and the way that it really tackles just human nature and our place in the world, and the way that we interact with nature as beings who are from nature, but we sort of deem ourselves above it. Yeah. And here's this like Area X, this alien, like this alien world just smack dab in the middle of the North American coast. And the way that just like twists the characters' minds and manipulates them in these ways that are just, it like I have on my office wall printed out the incredibly disturbing quote, or like the incredibly disturbing like words that are written in like in like vines and flesh on the tower in Annihilation. And it's just like those words just linger with me, you know? Like I sit down at my desk before I write or before I work or like edit on a podcast or something like that, and I just look at that, and it just,
that's so cool,
sears into my heart the feelings that I felt as this biologist is, you know, searching for her husband, but also searching for her own sense of identity, you know, and at the same time, the way that the nature of Area X is just slowly encroaching upon her sanity, as well as like her physical being, and the way that it just, I don't know, it's just this like insanely meta feeling of the insidious nature of ideas and the insidious nature of nature, and how Area X is seeping into everything. And then this book presents a story, and then it continues into Authority and into Acceptance of these concepts of like, who are you? You know, like who do you identify as? Like, what does it mean to be an individual? But also it's like, what are you in comparison to like the grandiose, sublime nature of this earth and this universe? And it's just like, it fucking blew my mind. It just so cool. Completely twisted my concept of like what literature could be. And the biologist is kind of like the vessel, sort of like James Holden, but instead of James Holden acting as a catalyst for the other characters in that series to shine, the biologist is the catalyst for the world of Annihilation and Authority and Acceptance to really creep into your mind in like the most devastating but beautiful way possible. All I can say is like sublime. Like it's just sublime. It's so fucking cool.
That's really cool.
I don't know if anyone's read those books or seen the movie at least.
Is it anything like the books?
The movie is quite a departure, but it does capture some of those like core themes, because I think the fact that it's spread out over 3 books, it really allows for that slow creep of the plot and the mysteries that it lays out, and the way that it just kind of like utilizes tension and horror to really mess with you. Like there are some really terrifying moments in those books, but it is so good. And the fact that it's given 3 books to really breathe out, I think the movie, just based on the fact that it was one movie, didn't necessarily have the time frame to work with that to such a satisfying degree, but it did capture like the core atmosphere and essence really well of the books.
Interesting. So the movie Annihilation is an adaptation of the whole series?
Just the first book and sort of plucking aspects from the second and third.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know if I like that. I mean, I liked the movie, but I didn't know any better.
Yeah, but I think it's like the books are, I mean, it's not like Frankenstein short, but it's like the whole series is like 900 pages. So you can...
Annihilation as a book is pretty short though, because I have it on my shelf and it's like under 200 pages, isn't it?
Yeah, like the first book is like 200-ish. The second and third ones are like less than 300. So it's a pretty short series, but it's insanely impactful because of the way that Jeff Vandermeer does POV and internal dialogue and perspective is so good, and the way that he describes is like beautifully poetic, but it's poetic about utterly disturbing things. And so there's this weird duality of like, I find this gorgeous, but at the same time I'm just disgusted by so much of what's going on, you know, like a human body just like taken over by mold and nature, and just a desiccated corpse. But the way that he describes it is so beautiful because it's like a tapestry of words. And yeah, I'm just like thinking back on it, I knew I was going to get like a little bit emotional talking about this, and it's like I can feel those emotions just welling in me, because that book really changed my world in terms of what I knew was possible with literature and character and description and all that. Like the craft aspect of it is just phenomenal. So,
excuse me, I believe the question was memorable character.
But that's the thing though. It's like I feel like the biologist is a vessel for the memorable character, and the memorable character, I think I should reiterate, the memorable character is Area X in this series.
Setting as character.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like the biologist is the lens through which this character is viewed, and that character is Area X because it is sentient. And
it's twisting the rules, but I'll allow it.
My podcast. I was twisting the rules unconsciously while talking about it. Yeah. But the biologist, in terms of like her story arc, by the time that acceptance closes out, is so good, because it's like her character arc and her relationship to Area X become so intertwined that it's almost impossible to differentiate the two. So it's like Area X and the biologist are essentially like one character, breaking the rules all over the place. Yeah,
you just had to. I just needed you to explain it to me. Thank you.
No worries. So we're gonna close out. If you want to throw in some honorable mentions, I'm just gonna toss out mine. So yeah, Locke Lamora from The Lies of Locke Lamora. Really love that character. Super witty, bit of a dick, but you know, he's very fun. Paul Atreides as well from the Dune series is so, I don't know. He's like very relatable, especially when I first read the book when I was a teenager. I was like, oh yeah, he's like a troubled teen prince. Like I can do that. And Clay Cooper from Nicholas Eames, Nicholas Eames, The Kings of the Wild. He's just like a grumpy old dad who's like a burnt out rock star. I say as in like ex-mercenary. But now that I'm a dad, it's just like that character and all the shit that he went through just really sticks with me now, and I love that. Lily, do you have you want to add in some honorable mentions?
Well, my last one is from a franchise that I'm not super into, but if you bring up Star Wars and you ask me my favorite character, I would say Leia. But if you wanted me to get into an argument about someone, it would be Han Solo. And I just think that is a very good example of the difference between favorite character versus memorable character.
I like that. Sarah, what about you?
So I do have two runners up. The first is Nynaeve, not necessarily because of the character herself, but because the way that Robert Jordan constantly describes her as like tugging on her braid, it's very memorable. That's not necessarily a good thing. That's not why she should be like remembered, but it does make for a character whose name I always remember. Nynaeve?
Braid tugger?
You've watched like only a handful of episodes, so
you're still not going to say the name of the book? I gave you the perfect opening.
I said Wheel of Time, didn't I?
You said Robert Jordan, but not the Wheel of Time.
Okay.
That lady with the braid in Wheel of Time.
Yeah, that lady with the braid in Wheel of Time. And then my other one, which is a more genuine, memorable character, is Miscellaneous Laney Stones from Saint Death's Daughter by C.S.E. Cooney, because what could be more memorable than a necromancer who is literally allergic to death?
I love that. I've never heard of that, but I'm so intrigued.
Cool.
Wow.
It's a fantastic book. Laney is a great character. And yes.
Also, the name is great too.
Yes. All of the names in this book and the way that Cooney uses language and like just plays with language is so much fun. Like this book is just a joy to read. Damn.
Okay, I'm gonna check that out. Connor, what are some honorable mentions?
I only had one. It was just Tyrion Lannister. I read Game of Thrones and that whole book series at a very formative age, and my opinions on them have only been complicated as I get older. But I think even just from like the cultural awareness of Tyrion as a character is just sort of like there's something really compelling about him. I think I prefer the book over the TV show, mostly because the TV show ends up becoming a parody of himself.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the gray morality. He makes some really fucked up decisions, and I think that led to making more of an impression on me, because like when he makes those decisions, I had already been like, I like this guy, and then it's like, oh no, you're strangling your lover in a jealous rage. Don't, what the fuck, sir? No,
sir.
Excuse.
That's a good pick though, and it is really interesting. I feel like people who've only seen the show have a very skewed perception of like what Tyrion Lannister as a character really is capable of, because in the books it's so good.
The later books are, especially, there were so many, I have so many ones where it's like, I was rooting for you, what are you doing?
It's like, come on,
I heard
man.
a great take that the actor is too cute and it skews people's perceptions of the character.
No, he's super disfigured in the books.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that shouldn't skew your opinions either. But you're like, oh, this really hot guy is playing this character, and so we're just gonna forgive all the shit he does. That's fine.
No.
Yes, cuteness begets everything, right?
Well, I mean, that's a thing that happens though.
Not for me. I mean, if it's like a dog that shits on my floor, I'm gonna be like, okay, that's fine. But when it comes to people, I'm a lot less forgiving.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just like the most super perceptive human, but that's definitely a thing that happens to most people.
Yeah.
I'm shallow. If I find a character attractive, I'm willing to forgive much more sins.
You have to be,
I'm ruthless.
I think that happens to me. I think I do that as well. Like if someone's hot enough, it's like you're doing your best. It's fine.
Yeah.
As long as you're still on my screen.
Oh man. No, I'm definitely just gonna be like, unless it's like a kid, even some kids, like I watch kids in movies and I'm just like, shut the fuck up, man. Like, you know.
No, see, kids I can't forgive.
Just cute adults.
Yes.
Well, Sara, Lilly, and Connor, thank you all so much for sharing your most memorable SFF characters with me. And Lilly, thank you for being so scrutinizing about the term memorable versus favorite. I like that.
I think it makes a more interesting conversation.
Oh, hell yeah. And it added a lot of nuance to this episode. But it's always a blast hanging out with all three of you. And if you could share where people can find you on social media, and Sara and Lilly as well, fiction fans. So Sara, if you want to kick it off.
Yes, so you can find us Fiction Fans Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Fiction Fans Pod on all the social media, and fictionfanspod@gmail.com if you want to send us an email about how you disagree with either Lily or I.
Which generally happens, you know, one or the other at least.
Never. I'm always right. No one ever disagrees with me.
Except on the podcast where we disagree constantly.
But that's the beauty of it. It's like no one loves just like, you know, the same opinion. There's no conflict. It's like a good story.
Mm-hmm.
Your tastes differ and the argument. You're very argumentative, both of you, so it's perfect. And Connor, what about you, buddy?
You can find me on Twitter at the CM Caplan, as well as the same on Instagram. And then I have a book, The Sword in the Street, which you can get on Amazon. And I have a new book coming out, The Fall Is All There Is, and it comes out on, I think, November 7th.
Woo! No, I'm so excited about that, man.
Oh, it's so good. You're going to love it.
Yeah, I'm excited. But yeah, thank you all for hanging out with me again. It's always a pleasure to see you. And yeah, until next time, because there will be a next time.
Thank you for having us.
It was wonderful hanging out. Thank you.
It was great being here.